Welcome back to Untamed Unbroken. Today we got a good one. Today we're changing things up a little bit. The format is going to be a little bit different. We're going to break it down into segments. The first segment we have today is wild updates. This is where we're going to talk about conservation, wildlife biology, ecology, anything to do with the outdoors and news around that and any updates there. See that lone pine up on that hill over there? What are we actually doing right now? The kids are just wild out there. They're wild. But they're having a good time, you know? They're having a good time. This is Untamed Unbroken, the Adventurer's Guide, and I'm your host, Blake Bredeson. So this week we got the 30-30 initiative, which is really a global thing, but in the U.S., is a plan that aims to conserve 30% of the U.S. lands and 30% of U.S. waters by 2030. So 30-30. 30% of the lands and water by 2030. 6 years away. Now, to put that in perspective, currently about 12 to 13% of the lands are conserved as of now in 2024. And about 26% of the waters are being conserved. And conserved, I just mean like there's some sort of protections in place around those lands to just maintain the natural habitat or the ecosystem in those areas. Now, the main thing about this, the initiative is driven by concerns for one, biodiversity loss, habitat destruction, climate change, and just it's a focus on protecting certain ecosystems and promoting conservation partnerships and just improving environmental impact federally and locally. Now, in my opinion, do I think we'll get to 30% of the waters? Yes, I think that one can be done. 30% of the land is a whole nother issue because so much of it is privately owned, and that's one of the hurdles to get through. But do I think realistically you could get to 20%? Yeah. 22%? Sure. I think that can happen. And for me, the reason that's important, you look around at individual towns, right, throughout the US. They're all just expanding slowly. Like here is an area that used to be in the country that's now being like a suburban development, right? So here's another subdivision of houses. Here's another subdivision of houses that used to be a field or a forest of some sort. And so that's what I see most around here where we live is fields. It's all fields. Used to be agriculture, and now it's turning into housing. But then you also see dispersed amongst all of that is commercial development within all of that as well. And it just slowly expands. And we need that. But we also need some sort of protections so that there's a limit, there's a threshold, and a certain percentage of our land and water is protected from development, really. Whether you can access that, I like the idea for my kids, but two, just cleaner air. Like you go into a major city, right? The air you breathe, it's not as clean. It's just not. It's not as a breath of fresh air out in the mountains or out in the woods. And when people talk about climate change, it all adds up. Think about it like this. You got a 30 square mile city that is all pavement, has some parks and stuff through it, but pavement, concrete, buildings, all developed 30 square miles versus at the same geographical, region, 30 square miles of natural habitat, whether that's forest or plains, whatever, doesn't matter, a mix, a few lakes in there. Take those side by side, the same latitude, longitude, in the same geographic location. In the summer, that city is going to be hotter than the land. right next to it. That land will be cooler. It acts as a buffer. Think of it like cold-blooded versus warm-blooded. And in the winter, that city that is concrete, asphalt, buildings is going to be colder. Then the land, again, acts like insulation. That land will be warmer. Significantly, I don't know how significant, but think of it like cold-blooded versus warm-blooded. Now, is that enough to really warm up the planet? I have no idea. I do know things add up, and it's all the little things that add up to something bigger. So what are some of the pros of this 30/30 initiative? Yeah, biodiversity and habitat preservation. That's a big thing, especially if they're looking at specific at-risk species or habitats. They're trying to protect some ecological systems out there. Again, climate mitigation. However much of an impact that actually has. But I'm all for conserving lands and waters. I like to outdoor recreate. I like to be outside. I don't want to see everything developed. That's just me. But we need some sort of development. There needs to be some sort of middle ground. But then the economic community benefits, right? If we're starting to get more parks, more wooded areas within cities, that's going to help too. Just conservation projects, restoration of culturally significant species like the American buffalo. Some of the cons now with this are the land use. What's going to happen with this land that's now being conserved? Are people able to use it? People in agriculture, forestry, or energy sectors, they express concerns about expanding conservation efforts and that limiting the land use availability for commercial use. And so they argue that this could negatively impact economic productivity and job availability in these more rural areas if they decide those rural areas are now protected. And so it's just because there's not a lot of details on the land use in the plan. So it's more of a up in the air and what if scenarios there. And then, political and funding challenges is obviously a big one. So some people will call it overreaching, federal intervention. Some, the cost involved. Federal state budgets are already stretched. So it's like, what are the priorities? The third big hurdle is private landowners. So they worry about potential restrictions on land use, property rights. They fear increased regulation, limitations on how they can manage or sell their land. But one of the big things, right, is that private land conservation is what a significant portion of this would be. And so that's private landowners participating in conservation easements where they would receive tax benefits or payments to preserve their land for that ecological purpose of just maintaining a natural environment instead of selling it off to be developed, right? Or something like that. A lot of private landowners do a lot of conservation on their own. And is it enough right now to get to 30%? No. But it would be some of that, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, Conservation Stewardship Program. They're all in supporting these efforts, but it's not going to be any one thing. It's going to be 100, 1,000 different other things, little things that add up. If you really want to hit a 30% goal, which I think is pretty unrealistic, if I'm being honest. Anyways, that is the 30/30 initiative. I know that's going on right now. We'll see what happens. This initially, I think, came out with the Biden administration and the beautiful agenda. We'll see what happens when it transitions into Trump's new administration coming up. I don't know. He did some good things, actual conservation-wise, when he was in office. So we'll see if he can continue some of those things or not. Or, I feel like in the end, it's going to have to be somewhere in the middle. As always, usually. let's move on. Today's FOQ, frequent outdoor question. Here it is. What's the best way to start a fire without matches? Now, this is good because this kind of leads right into the main segment where I'm recapping a camping trip with my daughter, but I started a fire without matches. It's just fun playing around in a campground. It's a lot easier to do when everything's dry, but you have your tinder, you have kindling, smaller kindling, medium-sized kindling, a little larger kindling, and then you have your fuel, right? Like starting to get into the bigger chunks. So collect all of this stuff ahead of time. Collect that tinder, which could be leaves, grass, birch bark is a great one. One thing I like to do is I'll split some small pieces of wood and I'll get down and I get a knife and I just shave little shavings of that wood and make a pile of shavings, wood shavings about the size of my fist, maybe the size of a softball. And I'll use that. And so you get everything lined up, make sure everything's dry. And so then you pile up that little stack of tinder, right? And then you can use, what I used was a ferro rod. You can use magnesium fire starter, a ferro rod. I mean, you could use the whole bow and stick method too, but with the ferro rod, you just stick that ferro rod right into the tinder and then you strike it and it sparks. And those sparks will catch that tinder on fire. And then you gradually add some more tinder, a little bit larger kindling to that, and larger until that fire is strong enough or big enough to get some of the larger fuel logs, split wood on top of that, and just let it rip. But also, it's just a fun way practicing that at a campground, in a campground setting where it's like, yeah, I got a lighter. We could do this super easy, have matches, whatever. Or you got a propane tank with a torch, but it's fun practicing those things. And it's a good skill to have. If you can start a fire with a ferro rod, you always have that as a backup whenever you're out in the backcountry. And it's just a good skill to have, a good tool to have in that tool bag. So there it is. FOQ. All right, coming at you with our book of the month. This is a book club. We'll call it book club, I guess. And so what I've been reading, The Meat Eater Guide to Wilderness Skills and Survival. Great book. You can check it out. I'll link it. But it has 7 main chapters. I'll just go through those. It says what to pack and where. It talks about water, chapter 2. Chapter 3 is all about food. And so this book is by Stephen Ranella. Chapter 4 is things that bite, maul, sting, or make you sick. Chapter 5 is shelter and warmth. Chapter 6 is navigation, wilderness travel. Chapter 7 is medical and safety. And I'm going to talk about you one little tidbit, and that's kind of what we're going to do with this whole book club thing. Is a book that I'm reading, going through. We'll take something from that book and expand on it or talk about it. And today we're going to talk about on the medical side of things. They go through a bunch of stuff in the book. And I wanted to go through a little thing called shock and going into shock and what this is, what it means. But basically what it is shock is a life-threatening medical condition where the body cannot get enough blood flow, which often leads to low blood pressure, insufficient oxygen to vital organs. And it can happen anywhere, not just in the outdoors, but it can happen due to injuries, extreme temperatures, dehydration, allergic reactions, blood loss. And so without intervention or treatment of this, shock can cause organ failure and even death. Okay? I'm sure you've heard what shock is before, or heard about it, or, oh, they're going into shock. That type of thing. But so how shock happens is trauma, blood flow is typically going to be redirected to the vital organs and away from extremities. which can induce some dangerously low blood pressure. Some signs and symptoms to look for with shock is pale, clammy, cool skin, rapid, shallow breathing, a weak, rapid pulse, dizziness or lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, confusion. They just don't really know where they are. Anxiety, agitation, extreme thirst is a big one. And in severe cases, you might get a bluish tinge to the lips, the fingernails. You're not getting any more blood to those extremities, right? So 2 things we're going to talk about is if you're alone and going into shock, and if you suspect someone else is going into shock. So you're more in a group setting. Let's start with if you're alone. So if you are in the outdoors, you're alone, and you start feeling some of these symptoms, maybe something happened, there's a trauma or something. You broke your leg, compound fracture, there's blood everywhere. Anyways, one of the biggest things, if there was blood everywhere, is to stop the bleed. Okay, stop the bleed, stay calm. You try to focus as much as you can, steady breathing to keep the panic away. Sit or lie down, find a sheltered area. Elevate your legs about 12 inches if you can. And so this is going to position yourself so it helps blood flow back to your vital organs. You want to keep warm. Use any available gear you have, a jacket, an emergency blanket, something like that to prevent hypothermia to set in. Shock can drop your body temperature, so keep warm. Hydrate carefully. Do not drink too much water. If you're going to drink any, take very small sips to keep hydrated over time, or don't drink any at all. Be kind of the thing. Some suggest to not drink at all. Some say take small sips. What you need to do is avoid chugging a bunch of water. And then signal for help. If you have that whistle, flashlight, I'm here, use that to signal. Or if you have a GPS device or a satellite communication device, messaging somebody and alerting someone to your location. If you have cell service, obviously you're going to be calling 911, call a loved one, whatever it might be, depending on where you are in your situation, right? Maybe all you need to do is call a loved one to come get you. Maybe you need 911. That's what I would personally be doing, is calling those emergency lines. The last one here, if you're alone going into shock, is conserve energy. Avoid unnecessary movements and keep your body from using too much energy. Okay? That's a tough one because, one, are you even going to be able to recognize the symptoms on yourself? Like, are you self-aware enough in that situation? If you're dizzy and lightheaded and confused, you're not mentally, it's going to be tough. Maybe you start to realize, like, hey, something's wrong, going in, something's wrong, sit down and go through some of those, keep yourself warm, get your feet elevated. Now, if you are with someone and you suspect someone else is going into shock, here are the steps to do that. It's just reassure, stay calm, speak to that person calmly, reassure them. If you panic, they will panic, most likely, right? So staying calm, it just kind of sets the tone, right? You stay calm, that's going to help them remain calm or calm down a little bit, right? Position them carefully, gently lay them down on their back, elevate their legs again, about 12 inches if you can, unless there's an injury preventing this, such as maybe a spinal injury of some sort. Keep warm and dry, so cover them with a blanket, that jacket, any insulating material might have, waterproof layers, protect them from the moisture, keep them warm. Monitor breathing, so make sure they're breathing well. If it becomes too shallow, you're checking their vitals. And if you're trained in CPR, just be ready to go. Provide fluids only if conscious. So this is where there's some people say, don't do any of that. Don't do fluids. But if they're fully conscious, not vomiting, Small sips of water are okay, but avoid food or heavy liquids or a lot of water. Small sips. And then signal for help. Get help in the area. If you're in that remote area, again, signaling gear. If you have a phone or that GPS device with the SOS feature, emergency services, you need to go that route. Preventing shock in the outdoor settings is the last point here. So it's pack for emergencies. Carry that first aid kit. Have emergency blankets, signaling devices. Make sure you have that emergency plan, right? I always carry that satellite communication device if I don't have cell service. Remain hydrated, staying hydrated and nourished, preventing dehydration and low blood sugar by eating and drinking regularly, especially during strenuous activities. That's going to help prevent it. Dressing for the weather, layering clothing, avoiding heat exhaustion or hypothermia, keeping dry, and then plan ahead, know the route, know the weather conditions, and let somebody else know your itinerary, what you have planned, where you're parked, that type of thing. And so understanding these signs and symptoms before going in, knowing how to respond, can be that difference. Now on to our camping trip, end of October, up near Sturgeon Bay in Door County. I took my daughter, just our annual tent camping trip. We were up at a state park. God, what was it called? Potowatomi State Park. Super nice state park. We were just in there. I guess I don't know if they call it like the North Loop or what loop it was of the campground, but it was the quieter of the two loops. There's no electrical on this side, so it was just in the trees, in the pine trees. It was very nice. It was quiet. There was in this little loop, there was only 4 other people camping, 4 other sites that were taken. So it was very quiet. Weather-wise, we went on a Thursday, picked her up early from school, and we got there before dark, set up the tent and all of that. But it was 50s. And then on Friday, it got into the low 50s, right around 50. Yeah, about 52.3 was the high, if I recall correctly. But we got there and started setting up that tent right away. And we have a bigger 12 by 10, 10 by 12 tent, older. It's like a field and forest from Fleet Farm. And we've had it for 10, 12 years. And it works great because it's big, it's roomy, and for camping like this, it's perfect. But we're setting it up, and one of the tent poles broke right where my daughter was holding the tent pole, and she got a nice fiberglass sliver. And so that, she didn't realize it right away, but it went in about a solid 1/8 of an inch, maybe just over an 1/8 of an inch into her finger. And so, tent pulled down, took care of that. She did. It was painful once she realized. She didn't know what it was. It kind of stung at first. She was looking, and then she was looking at me. And then once she realized it hurt, the tears started, and then took her over to the truck and we got it pulled out. Just kind of distracted her a little bit and pulled it out real fast. And then it felt much better. But for a little while, she was losing it a little bit there. But it's a fiberglass sliver. They hurt. And it was 3/4 of an inch long. And it was into her finger just over an 1/8 of an inch. And it bled just a tiny bit, not too much. But we got that out. So that's one of the 3 big takeaways. Here's her being able to bounce back and persevere after getting this fiberglass sliver, which I can't even say I've ever had a fiberglass sliver before. So she did great. We threw a Band-Aid on there, a little princess Band-Aid, or maybe it was the Ninja Turtle Band-Aid. And then she was good to go the rest of the trip. It was just one of those things that it happened right away. And I was kind of like, oh shoot, is this how this trip's going to start? There's always like one thing, it seems like, with each one little hurdle that we have to overcome when we've gone on our camping trips, our annual tent camping trips. But we got that tent set up. We got a tent set up. We went to the backup tent. I threw both in just in case. Don't even know why. I think I threw them both tents in. I have a small 3-person tent, and then we have that big one. I threw both in because I didn't know if the campsite would have a big enough tent spot for the big tent. It did, so I started setting that up first. When the tent pole broke, I put that away, grabbed our little tent, and we set that up. All was good. And then we just went. We actually did a little bit different style of trip. We didn't hang around the campsite the whole time. So that after we got the tent set up, we went into town. We ate dinner at this pizza place, but while we were waiting, they had a brewery underneath. So got like free popcorn and a beer there, just waiting for our table. And then we went and had pizza. And then after that, we went somewhere, got ice cream, came back. It was pretty late at this point. So we just went to bed pretty much right away. We didn't go to bed till like 10 o'clock, which is late for her. But we slept in as late as we could. And then we had our fire in the morning. We had some cereal, had a fire. We ate s'mores in the morning. It was great. And then we just kind of hung out at camp. We went over to the lake. She skipped rocks for the first time, so that was super fun. We went on a hike. And then we just kind of hung out for a while. And one of the big takeaways when you're traveling with kids or camping with kids, and especially little kids, is just patience. Go with the flow. Let her lead. Let him lead. Teach them something new. Like, I would try to teach her something new each camping trip. So we did this thing where she was wearing this like leopard print shirt, and it blended in with the leaves really, really well. So I was teaching her about camouflage. I taught her about a few of the trees that were around us in our campsite. She just likes to be outside and likes to have fun. And, at the end of the day, her favorite thing was just spending time with me. And that was my favorite thing, spending time with her. That's the whole point of it, is getting outside and spending time with each other. And that's it. And then just have as much fun as possible. But patience. It doesn't always have to be everything how you want it. You want them to have a good experience so that you can go out and enjoy these things, and you're kind of like enjoying them through their eyes in a way. Let them lead, teach them something new, and have fun. It doesn't always have to be a trip where you stay in and around camp and like hardcore camping. It's like you can go into the nearby town and do fun things that way too, like we did that first night. That sums that up. We will do a whole weekend next year. We had to go back on that Friday because she had to get to a birthday party on Saturday morning. And it would have just been cutting it too close, trying to take down camp and get there. Next year we'll hit up another state park or somewhere around there, and there's a lot of camping nearby where we live now in Wisconsin, and it's super nice. Last thing, let's head to the gear bin. We're talking about my everyday carry knife. It's the Spyderco Delica 4. I carry mine's blaze orange because I lost my tan one. But if you're looking for just a solid knife with good steel, if you're looking for a solid knife with good steel, just a pocket knife, this is the one I highly recommend. It's about a 3-inch blade, 2.9-inch blade. Japanese steel. It's a what is this? VG10 steel. Holds its edge super well, but yet it's still pretty easy to sharpen and get sharp again. Razor blade sharp though. Right now I'm looking at Amazon. They're about $80. $80 to $95, depending on what color handle you get, which that does not matter. The cheapest one happens to be Blaze Orange, which is $80. Super nice. I've had mine for years. I think lately the thing I use it for most is cutting up hot dogs at restaurants for our son. Always nice to have a pocket knife, utility knife, whatever you want to, just an everyday carry. That one I recommend highly. Another thing I recommend when camping is a nice fixed blade knife, 4 to 7 inch fixed blade. I have a 7-inch, but when I made our fire while camping, this camping trip we just talked about, I just bought firewood from a gas station, but I would baton those chunks into smaller chunks and then make shavings from there. But I would just use that 7-inch fixed blade knife from the top, use a chunk of wood and tap it down to split it rather than using an axe or a hatchet to split the wood. Super easy way to just split smaller pieces of wood is with a knife. That does it. Closing thoughts from today. Go check out that. If you're looking into a book that is about the wilderness, survival, all that, the Meat Eater book is really good. It's a good one to start with. If you're looking to learn how to start a fire without matches, doing it in your backyard, doing it on these little camping trips at a campground are a good way to practice and learn. We talked a little bit about the 30-30 initiative. Look into it, learn about it. I think overall it's a great concept. It's a great goal. Whether that's attainable or not, I don't know. Obviously, there's some details that need to be hashed out. But with that, thank you for tuning in. As always, stay wild. Thank you for sticking around. If you've enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating and review. Even one word, it helps a ton. Sincerely appreciate you guys. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay wild.
You've been listening to Untamed, Unbroken, a Lone Pine Adventures original podcast.